Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. Last week we finished the XR311 chassis and gave it a little bit of a test run. This week we're going to be putting together the body. The video might have to be split into two parts because I've been a bit busy with work this week and I lost a day to buying a full-size car, which was fun. Now, when it comes to the scale hard bodies, Tamiya do the nicest ones around, but this old kit is far more like a plastic static kit, lots of small parts. The kit as standard doesn't have any light fittings. The headlights have lenses, which is nice, but the rear lights are a solid plastic moulding. I'm going to be fitting some LEDs to them. I've got some 8mm reds that I'm going to shape to fit. The front bumper has some lights in it too, or rather it doesn't. I'm going to be opening up the slots for the side lights and fit some white LEDs. For the headlights, I'm going to be drilling a small hole through the mount and using these large white LEDs. They'll fit nicely inside and give us plenty of light. I'll do the mods off camera and show the results as we get to them in the build. Next we're going to fill a couple of bits on the body. There's this antenna mount I don't particularly like the look of. They've moulded in some slots in the back of the body as well as a small hole. All we're going to do is scratch up the inside of the hole to give the filler some purchase, mix up some car body filler, in this case good old Isopon, and press it into the holes. Off camera of course, as I wasn't checking the camera, but you get the idea. Once it's hardened up, we can give it a good wet sand to smooth it all out. In the meantime, there's the jerry cans to put together. Each one is made up of two halves, the handles and the filler cap. There's a choice of ways to stick them together. You could use cyanoacrylate or other cement type adhesive, but this plastic works extremely well with Plasti-Weld. It doesn't stick the plastic together like glue, it melts the plastic literally welding it together. It gives a really strong joint which, when it's fully hardened, you can completely smooth out all the seams. It's easy to do too. Just put a drop of the stuff on the join and it will run all the way around. Keep a bit of pressure on it for a few seconds and leave it to dry out. Really easy. Here's the rear of the body, all smoothed out. The rear light positions are cut out for the modified rear lights. A red LED on the top for tail, brake and blinkers, and probably not to scale, but I've opened up the bottom slot for some reversing lights. We need to get the rear grille sorted out before it goes on the body. It's a good idea to do a quick test fit first, just to make sure it actually fits. Sometimes you might find bits need a little bit of a fettle. It's a lot easier to do and fix things first. Tamiya supply you with plenty of mesh and give you a nice reference for cutting in the manual. Cut it to shape and glue it down to the inside of the surround. We can't use Plasti-Weld here as the mesh is the wrong type of material, but Cyano works just fine, but it will take a little while to dry. The rear body mounts need to get securely fitted. Once the engine cover gets fitted, they're going to be a pig to tighten up. A long M3 screw goes through the body. A nice little brass bit goes on. It has a right way up, so check the manual carefully. A nice smear of Loctite, it's all metal so we don't need to be mean, followed by a plain nut. Do it up nice and snug, same with the other one, but don't overdo it. If you compress the plastic it'll have a tendency to crack over time. Now the rear grille has all dried out, we can weld it to the body. I found the Halford's plastic primer I used here lets the Plasti-Weld through and still allows for a good weld. Not quite as good as clean plastic, but perfectly good for bits like this. Engine cover next. We need the big bit, obviously, the side rails and the bottom strips. The strips are sided, so keep track of which is which. They run along the bottom edge to completely surround where the mesh goes. They are of course a very good fit and only need a spot of Plasti-Weld at each end. While it hardens up we can get the rear bumper going at the same time. There's the bumper itself, the backing piece for the mesh, and the very much non-functional tow hook. We need to trim up some of the mesh to fit the recess in the bumper and just like the other bit stick it down with some Cyano. While it dries we can test fit the engine cover. Well, it all looks pretty good except the front right corner. You can see where the plastic's been stressed at some point so it doesn't quite fit. But it's soft enough that we can carefully bend it back so it's not really a problem. The mesh bits for the cover are a bit more tricky to cut. The ends are angled and need to be pretty close to the reference to fit without any gaps. Trim a little bit at a time until they're spot on. Just like the other bits of mesh we can stick them down with a bit more Cyano. Due to gravity being unidirectional, I'm going to do one side at a time to make sure the mesh doesn't slowly peel off before all the glue dries. Back to the rear bumper, we can install the tow hook. It should line up neatly on the bumper. I had to take a tiny sliver of plastic off to get it to sit perfectly. When it's in, it just needs a spot of Plasti-Weld to attach. When it's had a couple of minutes to set, the backing piece can go on behind the mesh along with a few more drops of Plasti-Weld. Once it's all hardened up, it's all ready to attach to the body. The last bit of mesh needs to get glued down to the engine cover and left to dry. I ended up doing a few more spots of Sino too, just to make sure the mesh was stuck down all the way round. It's in a spot where it might be a little bit vulnerable to getting pushed in with people picking up the truck. Now the Sino's gone off, you can see one of the reasons it's often not recommended for scale plastic models. If you use quite a lot, it tends to fog up the surrounding area, which if you don't sand it smooth, gives a different texture to the paint. In this case, it's mostly on the inside, so I'm not too bothered. It's worth keeping in mind though, especially for bits like the clear windows. Next we can fit the top rails. The side bits just drop into the holes in the cover, and by the looks of it will reach all the way down to the main body. Before we stick them in though, it's a good idea to pop the end rail in too to make sure everything's going to line up. And not surprisingly, it does, perfectly. It's always nice to build a nice quality kit. Each of the posts needs a little spot of plasti weld. While the plastic's soft, you've got a few seconds to make sure it's nice and straight. We'll leave them for a few minutes to harden up so we don't disturb the alignment, then fit the end rail. A few more drops of plasti weld. This time, while it's soft, we need to weld the ends of the side rails too. You can very gently massage the joints while they're soft, which will make the plastic tend to stretch, making a nice smooth join with no gaps. While that's all doing its thing, we might as well fit the rear bumper to the body. It's not really a functional bumper as it's not tied to the chassis, but it's going to look just fine. It's got a self-aligning bit moulded in, so it's quite difficult to get it in the wrong position. Hold it in the right spot and drop some plasti weld in from the inside. Keep hold of it with a little bit of pressure until the plastic's nice and soft, and carefully set up the angle. Tamiya seem to want it to match the angle of the rear panel. However, most of the pics I've seen of the real ones have the bumpers vertical to the ground. Either way, now's a good time to decide before the plastic hardens. While that goes off, we can cut the parts for the next bit free from the parts tree. We will need the fuel filler cap, the rather nice instrument panel, the other dashboard bits and bobs, the heel board, which leaves the extra bit for the front bumper. I'll be sorting that out off camera along with the front bumper and its LEDs. The body bits all go to make the shell a lot stiffer, and it would be quite easy to end up with a twisted shell, so we'll have to be very careful about getting it all nice and straight. However, I'm afraid that will have to wait until next time, as it's just gone 1/4 Saturday, and if I keep going I'm never going to get this video uploaded in time for Sunday. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, there's always that like button, and of course if you're not already, by all means subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Bye guys!